North Atlantic, May 24, 1943, 0600 hours, and Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz sat in his headquarters at the Hotel am Steinplatz in Berlin, staring at the message he was about to transmit to every U-boat commander still alive in the Atlantic, knowing this order would mark the end of everything they had fought for since 1939. The admission that his wolf packs had been defeated not by better seamanship or superior tactics, but by a technology his technical experts had assured him was impossible, a radar that could see in darkness what human eyes could never detect. And the numbers on his desk told the story in blood. 42 U-boats destroyed in a single month, 1,832 of his best submariners died, 25% of his entire operational strength was annihilated. All because British escort corvettes carried a device in a Perspex lantern that could detect a periscope at 900 yards in pitch darkness, while his boats sat on the surface charging their batteries and completely unaware they were being watched. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The message went out at 06:15 hours. Withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes immediately. And in that moment, as Dönitz would later write in his memoirs, we had lost the Battle of the Atlantic, though what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the technology defeating him had first been tested on a small Flower-class corvette named HMS Orchis in the Firth of Clyde on March 25, 1941, when a prototype device designated Type 271 had tracked a submerged submarine at 4,000 yards and detected its periscope at 900 yards, ranges that British radar engineers at the Telecommunications Research Establishment had achieved using a cavity magnetron operating at 10 centimeter wavelength, a frequency band that German radar warning receivers couldn't detect, creating a blind spot that would prove fatal to the U-boat arm. The British operator, sitting at his Type 271 console aboard HMS Orchis that March morning in 1941, had watched the green trace on his oscilloscope display, adjusting the gain control as the target submarine raised its periscope for a practice attack run. And there it was, a sharp spike at 900 yards, clear as daylight, though the Scottish morning was thick with mist. The 10-centimeter waves penetrating the sea clutter that would have swallowed the return on older metric radars. And he called out the bearing to the bridge. Contact bearing 045, range 900 yards. Probable periscope, not knowing he was witnessing the first successful demonstration of a technology that would sink 42 U-boats in a single month 2 years later. What made this moment revolutionary wasn't just the detection. Radar had been tracking surface vessels for years. But the ability to see something as small as a periscope cutting through waves, a target less than 18 inches wide, that earlier British radars operating at 1.5 meter wavelength couldn't distinguish from the sea itself. Yet this new S-band system operating at 2,950 MHz could resolve it clearly. The narrow beam width of the cheese antenna, so called for its truncated parabolic shape, provides angular accuracy of 2 degrees, enough to guide a corvette directly onto a submerged U-boat for a depth charge attack. The cavity magnetron that made this possible had been invented by John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham in February 1940, a device no bigger than a small electric motor that could generate microwave power levels previously thought impossible. And within weeks of its demonstration, Winston Churchill had ordered it shared with the Americans in what would become known as the Tizard mission, recognizing that this single invention might determine the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. Though neither Churchill nor the scientists could have predicted how completely it would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare, by September 1941, 32 corvettes carried Type 271 sets, the distinctive lantern-shaped radome mounted on their bridges, and production orders climbed toward 350 units. Each one assembled at the Allen West factory with the urgency of a weapon that could turn the tide of war. Though the Germans remained completely unaware of this development, their intelligence services focused on breaking Allied convoy codes rather than investigating the strange Perspex structures appearing on British escort vessels. The U-boat commanders operating in the Atlantic during this period still believed night surface operations gave them complete invisibility. And why shouldn't they, when their tactical doctrine, refined by Dönitz himself during his time commanding U-boats in the First World War, stated categorically that a surfaced submarine at night was virtually undetectable beyond 500 yards in even the best visibility conditions. And their operational pattern reflected this confidence: surface at dusk, run on diesels through the night while charging batteries, attack convoys on the surface where their 17-knot speed gave them mobility advantage over 10-knot merchant ships, then dive at dawn before aircraft could spot them. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke, commanding U-515, would later describe the typical night surface routine in his war diary. Surfaced at 2100 hours, sea state 3, visibility 2000 meters, began battery charge while proceeding on course 320 at 12 knots. Diesel engines running smooth. The crew enjoyed fresh air after 14 hours submerged. No sign of enemy forces. Completely unaware that British escorts, equipped with Type 271 radar, could track his boat at 3 times his visual range, watching his every move on their green glowing displays, while his lookouts saw nothing but empty ocean. The battery charging process itself created a vulnerability that U-boat designers had never adequately addressed, requiring 6 to 8 hours of surface running to fully replenish the massive lead-acid cells that powered underwater operations. Each Type 4AC U-boat carrying 2 sets of 62 cells, weighing over 200 tons total, demanding constant maintenance with distilled water, generating hydrogen gas that had to be vented to prevent explosion, and most critically, forcing the submarine to remain on the surface for extended periods, whether tactical conditions were favorable or not. A weakness that radar would exploit mercilessly. During these charging periods, U-boats followed predictable patterns, running at 8 to 12 knots to maximize diesel efficiency, maintaining steady course to avoid excessive battery drain from maneuvering, posting extra lookouts, but relying primarily on their METOX radar detectors to warn of approaching aircraft. The French-built device sweeping frequencies from 79 to 300 MHz, covering the 1.5-meter wavelength ASV Mark II radars that coastal command aircraft had carried since 1940, giving U-boats typically 5 to 10 minutes warning before an aircraft could reach attack position. Enough time to crash, dive and escape. The METOX receiver, manufactured by a small company in occupied Paris, had transformed U-boat survivability when introduced in August 1942. Its distinctive Biscay cross antenna erected on the conning tower, crackling in the operator's headphones whenever radar pulses struck it, the pitch increasing as the aircraft drew closer. And U-boat crews had learned to trust it completely, diving only when METOX warned them, conserving battery power and maintaining mobility that would have been impossible if they had to dive for every distant aircraft engine sound. But METOX had a fatal limitation that German scientists hadn't anticipated. It couldn't detect wavelengths below 50 centimeters, leaving U-boats completely blind to the 10-centimeter emissions of Type 271 radar. And worse, the Germans had convinced themselves that centimetric radar was technically impossible, their own experiments suggesting that atmospheric absorption would make such frequencies useless for detection beyond a few hundred meters, a miscalculation that would cost them the Battle of the Atlantic. The Italian experience in the Mediterranean provided a preview of what awaited the U-boats, though neither navy learned from the other's failures. The Regia Marina entered the war with no radar whatsoever, their fleet commanders dismissing electronic detection as unnecessary in the confined waters of the Mediterranean, where visual contact was supposedly always possible. An assumption that British radar-equipped vessels shattered repeatedly in night engagements, most catastrophically at the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941, where 3 Italian heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were annihilated in a night action they never saw coming. Admiral Angelo Iacchino, commanding the Italian fleet at Matapan, would later write, "We were fighting blind against an enemy who could see in the dark, his ships unable to detect the approach of British battleships, whose Type 279 radar tracked them at 24,000 yards while Italian lookouts saw nothing. The British guns opened fire at point-blank range in complete surprise. And even after this disaster, the Italian Navy wouldn't receive its first radar sets until spring 1943, the GUFO or OWL system arriving far too late to affect the naval balance in the Mediterranean. The Japanese Navy, despite beginning radar development in 1936 under Professor Yagi Hidetsugu, whose Yagi antenna would become standard on Allied radars, suffered from even worse organizational dysfunction than the Italians. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army developed completely separate radar systems that couldn't communicate with each other. And by 1943, when most Allied ships carried multiple radar sets, Japanese vessels were still relying primarily on optical rangefinders and the supposedly superior night vision of their lookouts, a handicap that American radar-directed gunfire exploited ruthlessly in the night battles around Guadalcanal. Commander Tamechi Hara of the Japanese destroyer Shigure would describe the shock of facing American radar-directed torpedoes at the Battle of Tassafaronga. Torpedoes came from nowhere, no gun flashes, no searchlights, just sudden explosions as our cruisers burst into flames. The Americans were firing from positions we couldn't see, guided by equipment we didn't understand. Though even this demonstration of radar superiority didn't convince Japanese naval leadership to prioritize radar development, their Type 22 sets produced only 2 kilowatts of power compared to the 70 kilowatts of improved British Type 271Q sets. Back in the Atlantic, the first signs that something had changed came gradually through the winter of 1942 into 43. U-boat commanders reported increasingly accurate night attacks by escort vessels, depth charges falling closer to their positions, even in conditions where visual detection should have been impossible. But German naval intelligence attributed this to improved Allied tactics rather than new technology, a fatal misunderstanding that prevented any effective countermeasures from being developed. The British, meanwhile, were systematically upgrading their radar capabilities. The Type 271Q, introduced in early 1943, with a 70 kilowatt magnetron, providing even greater range and resolution, combined with plan position indicator displays that showed a god's eye view of the surrounding ocean. Contacts appear as bright dots on the circular screen, with their range and bearing immediately apparent, allowing escort commanders to coordinate attacks with unprecedented precision. Lieutenant Commander Donald McIntyre, commanding the escort group B-2, described the transformation in his after-action report. With Type 271Q operational, night surface attacks by U-boats have become suicidal. We can detect them the moment they surface, track them continuously while they charge batteries, and attack before they know we're present. The radar operator calls out ranges while we close for the kill. Hedgehog projectiles fired on radar bearing alone, no need for visual contact. Though these reports were carefully classified to prevent the Germans from realizing their technological disadvantage, the Hedgehog itself represented another technological leap that radar made devastatingly effective. 24 spigot mortars firing contact-fused projectiles ahead of the attacking vessel, allowing continuous sonar contact throughout the attack, instead of losing the target in the ship's wake, as with traditional depth charges dropped from the stern. And when combined with radar detection of a surfaced or snorkeling U-boat, the kill probability increased from less than 5% with conventional depth charges to over 30% with radar-directed Hedgehog attacks. But the real transformation came with airborne centimetric radar. The ASV Mark III entered service in early 1943, using the same 10-centimeter technology as Type 271, but mounted in coastal command aircraft, particularly the very long-range B-24 Liberators that could patrol the mid-Atlantic air gap previously beyond aircraft coverage. And these radars could detect a surfaced U-boat at 20 miles, a periscope at 5 miles, all without triggering the METOX receivers that U-boat crews trusted with their lives. Squadron leader Terence Bullock, flying a Liberator equipped with ASV Mark III, described his first attack on an unsuspecting U-boat. Radar operator called contact at 18 miles, bearing 090. We approached from downmoon to minimize visual detection, maintaining altitude until the last moment. The U-boat clearly charges batteries, running steady on diesels. No indication they knew we were coming until we switched on the lee light at 1 mile, catching them completely exposed. Deck gun unmanned, bridge watch scrambling for the hatch, Our depth charges straddled perfectly as they crash-dived. Oil and debris surfaced moments later. One of 6 U-boats his squadron would destroy in March 1943 alone. The Lee Light itself, a 22 million candle power searchlight mounted under the aircraft's wing, turned the final approach into a death trap for U-boats caught on the surface. The brilliant white beam stabbing down from the darkness, illuminating the submarine like a spotlight on a stage, giving gunners perfect visibility for strafing runs, while depth charges tumbled toward the frantically diving boat. And U-boat survivors would describe the psychological terror of that sudden blinding illumination, knowing they had seconds to live. Oberleutnant Zur C. Herbert Werner, executive officer on U-230, recorded the experience in his memoir. The night exploded into brilliant white light. No warning from Matox, no engine sound over our diesels, just sudden blazing illumination from directly overhead. Men screaming, "Aircraft!" As we tumbled through the hatch, the boat crashed into an emergency dive as explosions shook the hull. Depth charges so close that cork insulation rained from the overhead. And we knew then that something had changed, that the night no longer belonged to us. Though he survived that attack, many others didn't. By March 1943, the combination of shipborne Type 271 radar and airborne ASV Mark III had created an integrated detection network that left no safe space for U-boats to surface and charge. Every convoy now surrounded by radar-equipped escorts that could see in darkness, while aircraft patrolled the transit routes and hunting grounds with sensors the Germans couldn't detect or defeat, turning the predator into prey. The mathematics of destruction were relentless. A Type Sevik C U-boat needed to surface for 6 to 8 hours every day to charge batteries, its submerged speed of 7.6 knots insufficient to position for convoy attacks, meaning it had to run on the surface to gain attack position. But now every hour on the surface exposed it to radar detection from ranges beyond visual contact. And once detected, the U-boat faced coordinated attacks from multiple escorts, vectored by radar, aircraft guided by radar, all striking before the submarine knew it was in danger. The German response, when it finally came, was too little and too late. The Naxos radar detector, introduced in September 1943, could detect 10-centimeter emissions, but suffered from excessive sensitivity, triggering false alarms from friendly aircraft and even atmospheric phenomena, causing crews to ignore genuine warnings. And by then, the Allies were already developing 3-centimeter radar that Naxos couldn't detect either, maintaining their technological advantage through the rest of the war. Admiral Dönitz, desperate to understand the sudden collapse of his U-boat offensive, interrogated survivors and analyzed patrol reports, initially concluding that the Allies must be detecting emissions from Matox itself, ordering all boats to shut down their radar detectors in August 1943, a decision that left them even more vulnerable to air attack, though the real problem, centimetric radar, remained unrecognized until captured equipment from a crashed RAF bomber finally revealed the truth in late 1943. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Men who had volunteered for submarine service, believing in their tactical superiority, now found themselves helpless against an invisible enemy. Morale collapsed as boats failed to return from patrol. The drumbeat heroes who had ravaged American coastal shipping in 1942 now died in the Bay of Biscay before even reaching their operational areas, caught by radar-equipped aircraft as they tried to transit on the surface at night. Funkmart Heinz Schaefer, radio operator on U-977, described the atmosphere. "We no longer felt like hunters, but like rabbits. Every moment on the surface filled with dread, watching the sky, listening for engines, knowing that death could come without warning from an enemy we couldn't see or detect. The old hands tell stories of the happy time when U-boats ruled the Atlantic, but those days were gone forever, replaced by fear that grew with every patrol." His boat was one of the few to survive the war, surrendering in Argentina 3 months after Germany's capitulation. The Japanese submarine force, observing German failures from afar, tried to learn from their allies' mistakes. Admiral Miwa Shigeyoshi requested technical information about Allied radar capabilities, but the Germans, humiliated by their defeat, provided only limited details about centimetric radar, and Japanese submarines continued operating with inferior radar warning equipment, their losses in the Pacific mounting as American radar technology, derived from the same British cavity magnetron, made their large boats easy targets for aircraft and destroyers. Lieutenant Commander Zenji Orita of Submarine the 177 would later write, "We heard rumors of German U-boats being destroyed by mysterious detection equipment, their crews unable to understand how the enemy found them in darkness, and we experienced the same terror in the Pacific. American aircraft appeared from nowhere, no warning from our detectors, depth charges falling around us before we could dive. Learning too late that our technology was generations behind our enemies." His boats survived the war only through exceptional luck and skill. The Italian submarine force, what remained of it after 3 years of losses in the Mediterranean, found an ironic salvation in their September 1943 armistice with the Allies. Their boats switched sides just as German U-boats were being slaughtered in the Atlantic, though several Italian submarines operating from Far Eastern bases chose to continue fighting alongside the Japanese, their crews experiencing the same radar-induced destruction that had decimated their German colleagues. Tenente di Vascello Enzo Grossi, commanding the submarine Cagni before Italy's surrender, described operations without radar. "We were sailing blind while our enemies had perfect vision. Their aircraft found us in weather that should have hidden us, their destroyers attacking from beyond visual range. Every surface was a gamble with death, knowing that technology we didn't possess and couldn't counter was hunting us constantly." His boat survived only by remaining submerged for unprecedented periods, surfacing just long enough to ventilate before diving again. The integration of radar with other technologies multiplied its lethality. High-frequency direction finding, or HUF-DUF, triangulated U-boat radio transmissions. Ultra-intelligence from broken Enigma codes revealed patrol routes and wolfpack positions, while radar provided the tactical detection capability to exploit this intelligence, creating a multi-layered detection network that left nowhere to hide. Commander Peter Gretton, escort commander of B-7 Group, explained the synergy. Ultra told us where to look. HUF-DUF told us when they transmitted. But radar let us see them when we got there, turning intelligence into kills. The U-boat might evade one system, but not all three working together, and once we had them on radar, they were finished. His group sank 6 U-boats during the critical convoy battles of May 1943. The convoy battle around ONS 5 Inches late April and early May 1943 demonstrated radar's decisive impact. 40 U-boats concentrated against the slow convoy. Weather conditions that should have favored the attackers with rain squalls and heavy seas reducing visibility. Perfect conditions for surface night attacks. But the escort's Type 271 radars tracked every approach, vectoring reinforcements to threatened sectors, coordinating counterattacks that sank 6 U-boats, while losing only 13 merchant ships, an exchange ratio that made continued operations impossible. During this battle, the escort vessel HMS Duncan detected U-boat after U-boat attempting to penetrate the convoy screen. Her Type 271 operator called out contacts. Radar contact bearing 270, range 3,500 yards, target speed 12 knots, probable U-boat charging batteries. The destroyer raced to attack position, while the submarine remained unaware of detection until star shells burst overhead and depth charges bracketed its position, forcing an emergency dive that saved the boat but eliminated any chance of attacking the convoy. The cumulative effect was catastrophic for the U-boat arm. Losses mounted from 10 boats in February 1943 to 15 in March, 20 in April, and then the staggering 42 in May, nearly 3 times the previous worst month, with experienced commanders and crews who couldn't be replaced, dying faster than new boats could be commissioned, the training pipeline unable to keep pace with losses, quality declining as inexperienced crews were rushed into service. Korvettenkapitän Victor Schütze, one of Dönitz's most successful commanders, withdrew from operations after barely surviving a radar-directed attack, telling his fellow officers, "The game has changed completely. We're fighting an enemy who can see in the dark while we're blind. sending more boats out. There is just murder. We need new technology or new tactics, but what we're doing now is suicide. His warnings were ignored by a high command that couldn't accept that their tactical superiority had evaporated. The German technical response, when it finally materialized, proved inadequate. The Type XXI Electroboot, designed for sustained underwater operations with enlarged battery capacity and streamlined hull for higher submerged speeds, but production delays meant only one completed a combat patrol before war's end, while the stopgap measure of adding schnorkels to existing boats simply made them vulnerable to radar detection of the schnorkel head itself, trading one vulnerability for another. Even the schnorkel, a Dutch invention captured in 1940, couldn't solve the fundamental problem that radar had created. The device allowing U-boats to run diesels while submerged at periscope depth, but reducing speed to 5 knots, making it impossible to maneuver for attack position, while the schnorkel head itself created a radar signature that skilled operators could detect, particularly in calm seas where the small target stood out against the smooth surface. Oberleutnant zur See Adalbert Schnee, commanding U-201, described schnorkel operations. Running submerged on diesels was torture. Exhaust gases leaking into the boat, pressure changes that burst eardrums when waves covered the float valve, speed so slow we couldn't chase convoys, and always the fear that enemy radar could see our schnorkel just as easily as they'd seen our conning towers, trading one detection vulnerability for another while sacrificing everything that made U-boats effective commerce raiders. His frustration shared by every U-boat commander forced to adapt to the new reality. The Bay of Biscay, which U-boats had to transit to reach Atlantic hunting grounds from their French bases, became a killing ground where radar-equipped aircraft maintained constant patrol. The Bay offensive of spring 1943 demonstrated the fatal combination of ASV Mark III radar and ley lights, aircraft flying parallel search patterns that covered every square mile of ocean, U-boats forced to run submerged even at night, drastically increasing transit times and reducing time on station. Flight Lieutenant Kenneth Moore of 224 Squadron described a typical bay patrol. "We'd fly at 2,000 feet, radar operator scanning for contacts, the bay divided into sectors that overlap to ensure no gaps in coverage, and nearly every patrol we'd find them, U-boats trying to slip through at night, thinking darkness protected them. But the radar saw everything, picking up periscopes, schnorkels, even just the wake of a boat running at shallow depth. And once we had them, the lee light and depth charges finished the job." His squadron alone accounted for 8 U-boats destroyed in May 1943. The technological surprise was complete, German scientists having dismissed Allied centimetric radar as impossible, their own experiments with magnetrons failing to achieve useful power levels, not realizing that British researchers had solved the problem with a different cavity design that generated 50 kilowatts, where German magnetrons produced only a few watts. This failure of imagination cost thousands of submariners' lives. Professor Leo Brandt of the German Naval Signals Research Department would later admit, "We convinced ourselves that atmospheric absorption would make centimetric radar useless. Our calculations showed signals would be attenuated to nothing beyond a few hundred meters. We never considered that raw power could overcome absorption, that the British were generating power levels we thought impossible. Our theoretical models were correct, but our assumptions about what was achievable were fatally wrong." His miscalculation contributed directly to the U-boat massacre. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Japanese suffered similar technological blindness, their radar development hampered by inter-service rivalry that prevented the Imperial Navy and Army from sharing research, resulting in incompatible systems that couldn't communicate with each other. While both services dismissed American radar capabilities until synchronized radar-directed gunfire destroyed ship after ship in the Solomon Islands night battles. Captain Toshikazu Omae of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Operations Section described the realization, We believed our superior night fighting skills and optical equipment gave us advantage in darkness. Our lookouts trained to see in minimal light, our oxygen-powered torpedoes invisible in their runs, but the Americans could see us beyond visual range, their radar-directed guns firing with accuracy we couldn't match. Our tactical superiority is meaningless against technology we didn't possess and couldn't counter. His assessment came too late to affect the war's outcome. The Italian Navy's experience proved equally tragic, their few Gufo radar sets arriving in spring 1943 just months before the armistice. Admiral Raffaele de Courton lamented, "We entered a technological war with 19th century methods, believing that Mediterranean conditions made radar unnecessary, that our optical rangefinders and trained crews could match British technology. But Cape Matapan proved we were fighting blind against an enemy with perfect vision, and by the time we accepted this reality, our fleet was already crippled. Only 12 Italian warships received radar before the surrender. The human cost reflected in the statistics was staggering. 1,832 German submariners died in May 1943 alone, entire crews of 48 men vanishing in seconds as depth charges split pressure hulls. Survivors describing the horror of compartments, flooding in moments, men trapped behind sealed watertight doors as their boats plunged beyond crush depth. The lucky few who escaped to life rafts, often dying of exposure before rescue. Matrosengefreiter Hans Gerbeler, one of only 3 survivors from U-505, described his boat's final moments. The depth charges came from nowhere, no warning, just sudden explosions that threw men against bulkheads. Lights failing, water rushing through ruptured seams, the boat rolling past 90 degrees as we tried to blow tanks, but the damage was too severe, the order to abandon ship coming too late for most. 45 of my comrades trapped inside as she went down, their screams haunting me still. His testimony is one of the few first-hand accounts of a U-boat's death by radar-directed attack. The strategic impact extended beyond mere numbers. The U-boat threat that had nearly starved Britain in 1940 and 42 neutralized so thoroughly that Allied convoys crossed the Atlantic, virtually unmolested after June 1943. Liberty ships, delivering supplies faster than U-boats, could sink them even before the submarine threat collapsed. The Battle of the Atlantic won not by courage or seamanship, but by technology the Germans never saw coming. Winston Churchill, who had declared the U-boat threat the only thing that truly frightened him during the war, would later write, "The cavity magnetron, no larger than a small electric motor, proved more valuable than divisions of troops or fleets of destroyers." Giving our forces the ability to see in darkness what German submarines thought hidden, turning their greatest advantage into their fatal weakness. A single scientific breakthrough worth more than all the gold in the Bank of England. His assessment was confirmed by the statistics of victory. The American contribution, initially limited to adapting British technology, soon exceeded the original, with improved magnetrons generating even higher power levels. Their 3-centimeter H2X radar achieved resolution that could detect submarine periscopes in sea states that swamped 10-centimeter returns, ensuring that technological superiority would continue advancing faster than German countermeasures could adapt. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, initially skeptical of British radar claims, became a convert after seeing demonstration results. The ability to detect a periscope at night in rough seas seemed like magic, but the Type 271 proved it repeatedly, and once we understood the implications, we pushed production to maximum capacity, equipping every escort vessel and patrol aircraft with centimetric radar, turning the Atlantic into a U-boat graveyard. His endorsement ensures unlimited resources for radar development. The Soviet Navy, receiving Type 271 sets through Lend-Lease, achieved similar results in the Baltic and Arctic. Captain Second Rank Alexei Lebedev, commanding destroyer Gremyashki, reported, "British radar gave us eyes in the polar night, detecting German U-boats attempting to attack our convoys to Murmansk. The fascists learning that Arctic darkness no longer protected them, our depth charges finding targets that optical lookouts could never have seen." Though Soviet radar development remained primitive throughout the war, Even neutral nations recognized radar's revolutionary impact. Swedish Naval Attaché Commander Erik af Klint observed, "The Battle of the Atlantic turned on a single technology that Germany failed to anticipate or counter. Their U-boats were designed for a war where darkness meant invisibility, but British radar eliminated that assumption, creating a detection capability that no amount of courage or skill could overcome. Technology defeats tactics absolutely." His reports influenced Swedish naval procurement for decades afterward. The psychological warfare aspect proved equally devastating. U-boat crews developed what psychiatrists termed radar neurosis, the constant fear of invisible detection, creating stress casualties even among boats that never encountered radar-directed attacks. Men breaking down from the strain of knowing death could come without warning, morale collapsing as the myth of U-boat invincibility died with each boat that failed to return. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, commanding U-96, observed the deterioration. Crews that had been eager for combat now dreaded leaving port, especially new men who heard stories from survivors. Tales of boats caught on the surface with no warning, entire crews lost in minutes, and you could see fear in their eyes during battery charging, everyone listening for aircraft engines, watching for searchlights, knowing that radar made us visible when we couldn't see anything. The hunter became the hunted. His own boat survived through exceptional skill and luck. The technological race continued even after radar's decisive impact became clear. Germans developing the Hohentuil radar for U-boats capable of detecting aircraft at 10 to 20 kilometers and surface vessels at 7 kilometers, but it operated at wavelengths Allied radar detectors could identify, creating a dilemma where using radar to detect enemies revealed the U-boat's position, negating any advantage. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of staff at U-boat command, analyzed the technological trap. Every countermeasure we developed arrived too late and created new vulnerabilities. Naxos detected 10 centimeter radar but not 3 centimeter. Our own radars revealed our positions. Schnorkels reduced speed below tactical usefulness. The Electroboot might have restored our advantage, but production came too late. We were always one step behind in a technological race where second place meant death. His assessment reflects the High Command's recognition of complete defeat. The broader implications for naval warfare were revolutionary. Radar transforming, surface combat as dramatically as submarine operations, battleships engaging beyond visual range, aircraft carriers launching strikes in weather that would have grounded planes previously, as destroyers tracking targets through smoke screens that had provided protection since naval gunfire began. Every aspect of naval tactics changed by the ability to see beyond human vision. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean Fleet, summarized the transformation. Radar gave us capabilities that Nelson could never have imagined. Fighting battles at night with accuracy equal to daylight, tracking enemies through weather that would have hidden entire fleets, coordinating forces across distances that visual signals could never span. The fundamental nature of naval warfare changed forever by electromagnetic waves we couldn't see, but which revealed everything. His fleet victories over the Italian Navy demonstrated radar's decisive advantage, repeatedly. The German surface fleet, what little remained after losses like Bismarck and Scharnhorst, recognized radar's impact even more clearly than the U-boat arm. Kapitän zur See Fritz Hintze, commanding battleship Scharnhorst during her final battle, reporting by radio before his ship sank, "Enemy radar has us constantly illuminated. They fire accurately without seeing us. We cannot escape or hide, fighting an enemy who sees everything while we see nothing." His message is one of the last from a German capital ship destroyed by radar-directed gunfire. The Japanese battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built, met a similar fate in April 1945. American carrier aircraft guided by radar through weather that should have provided cover, her massive 18-inch guns useless against enemies who attacked from beyond visual range. Admiral Ito Seiichi went down with his ship while recognizing that traditional naval warfare had ended, replaced by technology Japan had failed to master. The production Statistics reflected industrial prioritization of radar technology. Britain manufactured over 350 Type 271 sets by war's end, America producing thousands of centimetric radars across multiple variants, while Germany managed barely 100 Naxos detectors that arrived too late and detected only some Allied frequencies. The industrial imbalance is as decisive as the technological advantage. Lord Cherwell, Churchill's scientific advisor, calculated the exchange ratio. Each Type 271 set cost approximately £3,000 to manufacture and required one operator. Yet these devices destroyed U-boats worth millions of Reichsmarks and crews that took years to train. The return on investment exceeds anything achieved by conventional weapons. Proof that scientific superiority could determine military outcomes more decisively than numerical advantage. His analysis influenced British defence spending for generations. The training infrastructure adapted to radar's demands. Schools established to teach operators the art of distinguishing submarine returns from wave clutter, recognizing the characteristic spike of a periscope versus floating debris, and understanding atmospheric conditions that affected propagation. Skills that meant the difference between successful detection and U-boats escaping to attack convoys. Leading seaman Ronald Mason, Type 271 operator on HMS Vidette, described the training. We spent weeks learning to read the scope, understanding that sea state affected returns, that temperature inversions could create false contacts, that a periscope made a distinctive sharp spike, while debris gave fuzzy returns. The difference between life and death for merchant sailors depends on our ability to distinguish real targets from ghost returns. His expertise is typical of thousands of operators who became the eyes of the fleet. The maintenance challenges of operating complex electronics in marine environments pushed technological development. Moisture-proof housings, shock-mounted components, stabilized platforms to maintain antenna orientation in rough seas. Each problem solved advancing the art of military electronics, creating capabilities that would define post-war naval development. Chief Petty Officer Thomas Clark, radar technician aboard HMS Sheffield, explained the challenges. Salt spray corroded connections, vibration loosened components, temperature changes caused condensation inside units. Keeping these sets operational required constant attention. But we knew lives depended on that radar working when needed, so we improvised solutions, created maintenance procedures, developed expertise that didn't exist before the war. His experience replicated across every radar-equipped vessel. The German reaction to radar defeat influenced post-war naval development, their few surviving U-boat commanders advocating for submarines that could operate entirely submerged, never needing to surface where radar could detect them, leading directly to nuclear submarine development, where underwater endurance became unlimited, though this solution came decades too late to affect World War II's outcome. Conter-Admiral Eberhard Gott, chief of U-boat operations, testified at Nuremberg. Radar defeated us completely. Our entire tactical doctrine assumed darkness provided concealment, that surface mobility gave us advantage. But British radar eliminated both assumptions, forcing us to continue operations we knew were suicidal, because admitting defeat meant accepting that technology had made our submarine force obsolete. His testimony confirmed that German leadership understood their technological disadvantage but couldn't counter it. The Pacific submarine campaign demonstrated different dynamics. American boats equipped with superior radar hunting, Japanese vessels that lacked both radar and radar detectors. USS Wahoo under Commander Dudley Morton, using radar to track targets beyond visual range, surfacing to attack, positions Japanese escorts couldn't detect, achieving kill ratios that dwarfed German U-boat successes even during their happy time. Commander Richard O'Kane, commanding USS Tang, described the advantage. Our SJ radar could track Japanese convoys at 25,000 yards. We'd plot their course and speed, move ahead on the surface using radar to avoid escorts, attack from ahead where they didn't expect submarines, then escape on the surface guided by radar while they searched blindly. Technology gives us near impunity against an enemy operating with World War I methods. His boat sank 33 ships before being lost to her own torpedo. The Mediterranean submarine campaign saw similar disparities. British T-class boats equipped with Type 291 radar-hunting Italian submarines that operated blind. HMS Upholder, under Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Wanklyn, using radar to track Italian supply convoys to North Africa, sinking over 100,000 tons of shipping, while Italian submarines achieved minimal results despite superior numbers. Capitano di Corvetta Gianfranco Gazzana Priaroggia, commanding the submarine Bagnolini, admitted, "We operated like blind men while British submarines had perfect vision. Our boats were detected and destroyed before we knew enemies were present. The few radar sets we received in 1943 coming too late to matter, the naval balance already decisively shifted by British technological superiority we couldn't match." His elite submarine unit disbanded after catastrophic losses. The economic impact of radar victory rippled through entire nations. Britain's survival depended on Atlantic convoys that U-boats nearly severed in 1942, but radar's defeat of the submarine threat allowed massive buildup of supplies for D-Day. 2 million Americans were transported across the Atlantic without significant loss after mid-1943. The arsenal of democracy, delivering victory through sea lanes that radar kept open. The U-boat building program, consuming enormous German resources, produced 703 Type 7 submarines, each requiring specialized steel, batteries, diesels, torpedoes, and trained crews. Yet radar rendered this massive investment worthless. Boats destroyed faster than they could be built. Experienced crews lost faster than replacements could be trained. The entire submarine force reduced to impotence by technology costing a fraction of submarine construction. Reich Minister Albert Speer, head of German war production, calculated the waste. "We invested billions of Reichsmarks in U-boats that made radar obsolete, resources that could have built thousands of tanks or aircraft. But we continued building submarines even after their futility became obvious, trapped by institutional momentum and Hitler's insistence that wonder weapons would reverse the defeat. Throwing good money after bad while Allied radar ensured those boats would die on their first patrols." His post-war memoirs reveal the economic catastrophe of fighting technology with numbers. The scientific legacy extended beyond military applications. Cavity magnetron technology, enabling microwave communications, radar astronomy, medical imaging, countless civilian applications stemming from the device that first allowed HMS Orcus to detect a periscope at 900 yards. The butterfly effect of scientific breakthrough, transforming entire civilization. Sir Robert Watson Watt, often credited as the radar's inventor, though the technology had multiple fathers, reflected, "We gave sight to the blind, allowing ships to see through darkness and weather, aircraft to detect what human eyes could never perceive. But the real victory was proving that scientific superiority could determine military outcomes, that a small device generating electromagnetic waves could defeat the largest submarine fleet ever assembled." His contribution to victory was measured not in battles but in technologies that rendered entire enemy strategies obsolete. The intelligence failure that allowed radar surprise reflected deeper German institutional problems. Their scientific community isolated itself from international developments, dismissing Allied capabilities based on their own limitations. Unable to imagine that British scientists had solved problems German researchers considered impossible, arrogance becoming blindness that cost thousands of lives. Dr. Hans Ferdinand Mayer, German radar researcher, admitted after interrogation, "We knew the British had radar, everyone did. But we assumed their technology was similar to ours, operating at frequencies we could detect and counter, never imagining they had achieved power levels at wavelengths we thought impossible. Our insularity prevents us from recognizing threats that should have been obvious." His confession revealed how scientific hubris contributed to military defeat. The British success stemmed partly from international cooperation, Polish scientists providing crucial intelligence about German radar development, French researchers contributing magnetron improvements, American industrial capacity mass-producing British designs, Canadian scientists refining detection algorithms. The Allied scientific community shared knowledge while Axis powers worked in isolation. Professor Mark Oliphant, part of the British radar development team, explained the advantage. We had the world's best minds working together, sharing discoveries, building on each other's work. While German scientists operated in secrecy, even from each other, Japanese researchers were forbidden to communicate with Germans. Italians excluded entirely. Their isolation prevents the cross-pollination that drives scientific breakthroughs. His assessment was confirmed by comparative analysis of Axis versus Allied technological development. The operational security protecting radar secrets proved remarkably effective. Thousands of sailors and airmen knew about centimetric radar, yet the secret remained hidden from German intelligence for crucial years. Crews disciplined about not discussing capabilities in letters home, the press voluntarily censoring stories that might reveal technological advantages. Democracy proved capable of keeping secrets when survival depended on it. Vice Admiral Sir Peter Gretton wrote post-war, "Every escort sailor knew that radar was winning the battle, that U-boats couldn't detect our sensors. But this knowledge never reached German intelligence in actionable form. Our security measures worked perfectly when they mattered most, protecting the technological advantage that saved countless lives and determined the war's outcome." His testimony to the effectiveness of Allied counterintelligence. The radar development pipeline continued producing improvements throughout the war. Type 277 replaced 271 with even greater range and resolution, 3 cm sets replacing 10 cm, each generation maintaining technological superiority over German countermeasures. The scientific war won by maintaining momentum rather than resting on initial advantages. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, commander of RAF Bomber Command, observed, "We learned that technological superiority was temporary, that enemies would eventually develop countermeasures, so we kept advancing, newer radars replacing older ones before Germans could counter them, maintaining advantage through continuous development rather than believing any single technology would remain decisive forever." His philosophy drove Allied research throughout the war. The post-war analysis revealed how completely radar had transformed naval warfare. Traditional tactics obsolete, visual range engagement replaced by beyond-horizon combat, surface vessels no longer able to hide in darkness or weather, submarines forced to evolve toward true underwater operation rather than submersible surface vessels. Every assumption about naval combat was overturned by electromagnetic detection. Admiral of the Fleet Sir Dudley Pound concluded, "Nelson's tactics at Trafalgar remained relevant for over a century, but radar changed naval warfare more in 5 years than previous centuries combined, making traditional battle lines obsolete, enabling coordinated operations across oceanic distances, transforming submarines from invisible predators to vulnerable targets. The age of electromagnetic warfare replacing the age of sail and steam." His assessment defined naval doctrine for the nuclear age. The human drama played out in thousands of individual encounters, radar operators staring at green traces for hours, submarine crews dying without understanding what had detected them, pilots guided through darkness to targets they couldn't see, merchant sailors saved by escorts that intercepted U-boats beyond visual range. Technology determines fate more than courage or skill. Able seaman William Davis, serving aboard merchant vessel SS Empire Heritage, described one encounter. "We heard depth charges exploding ahead, our escort racing off into darkness. Then a signal lamp reporting the U-boat was destroyed. We never saw anything, just our escort disappearing and returning, reporting another submarine killed by radar we couldn't see or understand but which kept us alive, crossing the Atlantic." His experience is typical of thousands of merchant sailors who owed their lives to Type 271 radar. The final accounting showed decisive victory. 42 U-boats lost in May 1943 alone, over 780 U-boats destroyed throughout the war, 30,000 German submariners killed from a force of 40,000. The highest casualty rate of any service in any nation, most dying after radar made their tactics obsolete, continuing operations that technology had rendered suicidal. Grand Admiral Dönitz, writing his memoirs in Spandau prison, reflected, "We fought the wrong war, preparing for battles where seamanship and courage determined victory. But the British fought with science, their radar defeating our submarines before crews knew they were detected. Technology we didn't anticipate and couldn't counter determined the outcome regardless of our tactical superiority or crew quality. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost in British laboratories before it was fought at sea." His admission confirms radar's decisive role. The broader strategic implications reshaped global power. Britain's survival enabled D-Day, American forces building up in England for continental invasion, and the Soviet Union receiving Lend-Lease supplies through Arctic convoys, all dependent on sea lanes that radar kept open after U-boats nearly severed them. A single technology determining whether democracy or fascism would prevail. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, stated simply, "Without radar defeating the U-boat, Operation Overlord would have been impossible. We couldn't have assembled the invasion force, supplied the armies, or maintained communications across the Atlantic. The liberation of Europe depends on electromagnetic waves detecting periscopes in the dark." His assessment of radar's strategic impact beyond mere tactical advantage. The technological revolution sparked by radar continued accelerating. Wartime research produced innovations that defined the post-war era. Computers developed to process radar data, satellites using radar mapping, medical scanners adapting military technology for civilian benefit. The cavity magnetron's legacy extends far beyond detecting U-boats, transforming human civilization through applications its inventors never imagined. Sir John Cockcroft, director of the Atomic Energy Research Establishment, observed, "The cavity magnetron proved that small devices could have massive impact, that scientific breakthroughs could determine historical outcomes, inspiring the Manhattan Project and every subsequent military technology program, the lesson being that a research superiority meant survival, driving the technological arms race that defined the Cold War and beyond." His analysis linked radar victory to broader scientific competition. The U-boat memorial at Multenourt lists 27,491 names of submariners lost at sea, most dying after May 1943 when radar made their operations suicidal. Young men who volunteered believing in technological superiority, dying to technology they never understood. Their sacrifice was ultimately meaningless against electromagnetic waves that revealed them in darkness they thought provided protection. The final irony came from Dönitz himself, promoted to command the entire Kriegsmarine after radar defeated his submarines, then briefly serving as Germany's head of state after Hitler's suicide. The admiral who lost the Battle of the Atlantic to British radar presiding over the Third Reich's final collapse. His career bookended by technological defeat he never fully comprehended until too late to matter. On that morning of May 24, 1943, as Dönitz transmitted the withdrawal order, he couldn't have known that the war was effectively over. That radar had eliminated Germany's only remaining strategic weapon capable of affecting the outcome. That the technology first tested on HMS Orcus 2 years earlier had grown into an electromagnetic network that made Allied victory inevitable. The cavity magnetron proved mightier than all the U-boats ever built. The last entry in the War Diary of U-Boat Command for May 1943 read simply, "The enemy's superiority in location devices has made continuation of the battle impossible. Withdrawal from the Atlantic is necessary to prevent further catastrophic losses." 15 words admitting total defeat by a technology that German science had declared impossible, British engineering had made reality, and 42 U-boats had died, proving decisive in the Battle of the Atlantic. The waves of the North Atlantic continued their eternal rhythm, indifferent to the technological revolution that had played out across their surface. But beneath those waves lay the graves of thousands of submariners who had believed darkness was their ally, never knowing that invisible electromagnetic waves had betrayed them to enemies they never saw. The Battle of the Atlantic, won not by the bravest sailors or the largest fleets, but by scientists in British laboratories who had given their nation the power to see in darkness, a power that changed not just one battle, but the entire nature of war itself. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.